On this episode of the Newman Bond, Assistant Professor Shannon Johnston presents an inside look at her art exhibition, Qualities and Quantities, in the Steckline Gallery. Her work, which showcases data from her experiences as a mother, encourages viewers to explore the beauty of relationships and routine, rather than the monotony of counting minutes and ounces.
Thank you. As I was preparing for today, I was torn because so many of you know so much of my story already, and know me as a faculty member, know me as a professor, have had classes with me, we've worked together on projects, but it's fun to get to show you this side of me, which I haven't really gotten to do since I've been at Newman. In general, as an artist, I'm very interested in these intersections of the mundane and beauty, of fine art and the domestic realm, and relationship and visual representation. Ideas that kind of motivate me to make art and pop up in my artwork a lot are repetition, regeneration, generosity. I feel like there's another one, but I forgot it. I like to tell people, well, my degrees are in painting, I like to tell people that my medium is yes. I think we can make art out of anything. And I believe that matter matters. Objects are important and they carry a history and a meaning with them. And so when I choose to use watercolor versus liquid gold leaf versus graphite versus prescription bottles versus an infant crib, it all carries a meaning and comes with a history that tells part of the story. My work is always very, very connected to my own personal experience, but the hope and the idea is that it's less about like my personal experience and it's more about those ideas of generosity, repetition, regeneration, community, relationships, the domestic influences that makes it relatable for you in your own way. This specific body of work has been about 3 years in the making. As many of you know, I had a son, a little boy, on November 2nd. His birthday is coming up on Saturday in 2021, so 3 years ago, which is kind of like serendipitous that I'm opening the show today and tomorrow, and then he turns 3. And a lot of this work is based on data that was collected during my son's life, and then 2 years after he was born, I had a little girl, which if you guys saw me last semester, she was here, and just this kind of collection of data of what did he eat, when did he eat, how long did he feed, when did he sleep, how long did he sleep, how long was he awake. It was all these data points that I kind of obsessively started collecting in these early stages of motherhood. I'm a person who is prone to anxiety and depression, and postpartum threw me for a loop, and developed some pretty significant postpartum and depression with postpartum depression and anxiety with my son, and then postpartum anxiety and rage with my daughter, which was super fun. But this collection of data, this kind of documenting everything, became a way of controlling the situation so I could understand my own experience within it a little bit better. I had a notebook, and I almost included the notebook in the gallery as an artwork, but decided it felt too specific. It was too much about my own story, and I wanted it to be more about the process and this experience rather than like, oh, Shannon had to feed this baby X number of times a day and like he drank so many ounces of formula. When you look at some of this work, it's not necessarily about, this doesn't look like it's necessarily about formula. It is. That's where the genesis of my making of it came from, but the experience for you can include a lot of different things. But it's that idea of quantities, of repetition. Does that make sense? Okay. Which is kind of where the title comes from, Qualities and Quantities. As an older mom, I became a mom when I was 40. So as an older mom, but also as a mom who dealt with some mental health issues, both of those things can affect milk supply. I had this like idealistic, like Mother Nature, I was gonna just breastfeed for like 16 years. Not really, not really. That's weird. I thought it would be easy, I thought it would be natural. All of the blogs that I had read told me that it was gonna be the most natural and beautiful thing in my life, and it was not. It was really, really hard for me. It was really frustrating. It was uncomfortable. It was exhausting. And then my body wouldn't make enough milk for my hungry, hungry hippo of a son. Which led to this extreme like sense of failure and disappointment. And so it kind of became this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The depression perpetuates the milk supply issues. The milk supply issues perpetuated the depression, and it was this like endless cycle, which I completely documented. When I had my daughter, I was ready to roll. I was like, you know, my mental health is gonna go off the rails. My hormones are gonna go off the rails. I'm not gonna be able to make enough milk. It's all gonna be terrible, but we'll get through it. If I can get through that first 6 months, it'll be okay. The first 6 months of being a parent are not my favorite. I'm not a newborn person. If you find yourself in that boat, it's okay. You can still be a good parent and not love having a newborn. When I had my daughter, I started, because I think I had been through it before, I was a little bit more prepared. I didn't feel like a failure because I found out that, you know, she was losing too much weight. We had to supplement with formula. It was a lot easier, and I was able to focus on cultivating a relationship with her through my time feeding her, whether it was through nursing or through milk that I had pumped for her or through formula. And so it became about the quality of the time rather than the quantity of the formula. Likewise, it became about the quantity of the time, not the quality of the milk. Does that make sense? Yeah, you with me? You may have never breastfed a baby, and that's probably a good thing in many of your cases. My hope is that you look at this work and it doesn't just, I mean, some of it's obviously about feeding, right? This piece here is a formula canister. These are breast pump parts, formula scoops. This is a family heirloom. So this infant crib was actually made by my great-grandfather for my grandparents when they found out they were having my mom. And my mom and her 4 siblings slept in this crib. My sisters and I slept in this crib. I think a couple of my cousins did. And then all of my nieces and nephews and both of my babies did. This is probably not Safe Sleep certified. I feel like I have to say that for the video. My babies were fine. So it's very specific. It's very much about my story and my experience in some of the works. Other of the works, I didn't want it to be about feeding, about this experience. So that's where I started exploring almost data visualization. And so that's where the pieces on this back wall, as well as the pieces behind me, came in. Questions so far? It's kind of like the big umbrella. Do you guys want to talk about some of the specific works? Okay. So this is actually the first work that started in this series, and I started making this just before I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. This series is titled Crying Over Milk. You know the phrase, don't cry over spilt milk? I cried over spilt milk a lot. I cried over milk in bottles, I cried over milk in pumps, I cried over milk in my baby, I cried over all of the milk. So this idea of crying over milk was playing in my mind. So this whole series is titled Crying Over Milk. The individual pieces are numbered though. This is 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, and 4. They are not numerical numbers. I mean, they are numerical numbers, but they reference the months. My son was born in November. So this is the start of our journey with formula. Each dot represents a day, and then each concentric circle is an ounce of formula he drank that day. If you've ever made formula, it has kind of a weird bluish tint. Whereas my milk had more of a yellowish tint, so I could always I could look at a bottle and tell you if it was formula or not, which is so weird. It's so weird. So I wanted to use blue to kind of reference that formula color. The formula we were using at that point was in a blue canister. And it was this very kind of pragmatic relationship. And so that kind of influenced the structure of how these circles are kind of aligned, right? They're orderly, they're sort of aligned, but they're a little chaotic. In December is when I really started noticing a change in my mental health, and especially around feeding. And so the blue shifted to a darker color and incorporated more gray to reference that struggle, that kind of dark period. And then the circles start to overlap, they can become more chaotic, right? There's this kind of cramming in. As we get into January, this is when I came back to work, right? My son was 10 weeks old, the semester was starting, we're coming back to work. I started relying on formula more because feeding him here was a little awkward, right? More difficult. And so things started to kind of clarify a little bit, get a little more structured, a little more orderly. My relationship with using formula started to shift and then get more clarified and more clarified. You can see that his appetite is growing. And then by April, it was more natural. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing. It's okay. I had kind of come to a point of acceptance with it. We kind of reached this kind of systemized understanding of the formula. We had to switch to a different formula that was in a purple canister for him. It doesn't reflect the whole month. It just goes up until we started solids with him. And then all of a sudden my relationship with formula changed when we started solids, because everything went the way I wanted it to with solids. Alex, do you have a question?
Is there a reason that on this blue one over here that one of them is so much smaller than all the other ones?
Like this little baby one?
Yeah.
That was the first day.
Oh, okay.
So that was the first day. He was about a week and a half old when we started formula. I went to a lactation clinic. I met with a nurse who was gonna help me. And she was like, your baby is underweight. I have to report you to your pediatrician as having a failure to thrive baby. You need to feed him this formula, and handed me a bottle, and I lost my My mom was with me. She knows I cried the whole way home. She was like, it's okay, it's okay. And she went and got bottles and formula for us. So yeah, that was that first day when he just didn't, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon at that point, and then the pediatrician's calling me and yelling at me. His nurse was not the nicest. It was this whole thing, right? So that's why it's smaller. Yeah. Other questions about crying over milk? Okay. The next works that kind of happened around the same time that crying over milk established was this one, which is Liquid Gold Triple, and then the non-medical advice, which we'll come to that one next. So within the newborn community, breast milk is often referred to as liquid gold. Within the art world, we also can buy liquid gold leaf and paint with it. I also really, really love early Christian art, that kind of very early, just before the Renaissance, Quattrocento kind of era of art history. There's something kind of calm and sacred feeling about gold leaf in artwork for me. So I wanted to kind of play with this pun, really. And so this is in that same data viz kind of exploration. Every circle is 5 minutes that I nursed my son. Every triangle is 5 minutes that I pumped for him. And then the little dots are where he would cluster feed, where he would just be half asleep and half nursing for hours on end. Triple feeding was the worst thing in the world. What triple feeding is you feed your baby 3 times, essentially. In one feeding, you nurse them, you give them a bottle, and then you pump milk for them. And use that pumped milk for the next bottle. It's exhausting. The whole process would take us about an hour, and we had to do it every 3 hours, 24/7. And we did this for 8 weeks. This is also where my mental health really starts deteriorating, because I never got more than 2 hours of sleep at a time. But taking something that was so hard, that was so challenging, that broke me down emotionally and physically, and putting it in a context that made it just about the time, and did it in a way that referenced something beautiful and made it something more beautiful because of the material. And acknowledging through the material that all of these kinds of feeding, whether it was pumped milk or nursing or cluster feeding, were all the same, right? I'm still just feeding my baby. Yes, sir?
Are you planning on like once they're old enough to understand, are you planning on like explaining what it means to them?
Oh, 100%. So we have the first Friday reception tomorrow, 5 to 7 p.m. I would love for you to come back. But in that kind of first half hour, 45-minute window, my husband's gonna bring our kids up here. And so like even now when they're like 3 and 1 years old, like being like, this is the artwork that I made about my time feeding you. So again, very specific story, very specific data that relates only to me, but through representing it in a visual way, my hope is that you can find your place in it. You know, these ideas of repetition, of things being the same but different, right? How many of you guys are student athletes? Yeah, a bunch of you. How much repetition do you do in your practices? A lot, right? And you can like throw free throws for hours and still feel like you're not getting them right? It's the same idea. And so there's this kind of honoring the process, even though it's frustrating and long and hard. That makes sense? Am I talking about breastfeeding way too much? Are we all good? I'm just gonna say all the anatomy parts in one artist talk. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the art that you put together, and the idea that you come up with. Did you think about any of this during your first pregnancy or your second? Or did you think about it, or did this idea come up before you were even pregnant?
Because my artwork often reflects my own personal narratives and does hover around that domestic realm, I anticipated that if and when I became a mother, that would impact and shape me as an artist. I didn't know how. And then when I was going through these kind of early parenthood stages with my son, I had no idea how it was gonna be like redeemed into something else. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I was anticipating it a little bit more, but at that point I had already started the crying over milk work, the triple feed work, and the non-medical advice work. Does that answer the question? But even as I was documenting all the information with her, knew it would be different, and didn't know what it would actually look like. Other questions? Your questions are more interesting than my story. But, okay, do you want to keep talking about the individual works?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll talk about non-medical advice. We should have put you all on swivel chairs.
Hi. That one, or is it? It's not part of those two.
The one on the end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's coming.
Good enough.
So this work started after I had my son, right as I was finding out that I was expecting my daughter. So this work is made up of 274 individual prescription bottles. Shout out to the Oberly family that collected a ton of prescription bottles for me. Shout out to my family who collected a ton. Oh, hi. How you feeling? My family, Mark gave me a couple of these. Lots of people donated prescription bottles, so they were all actual prescription bottles. I did not buy them off the internet. Each bottle has a piece of paper on the butt which has a piece of advice that was unsolicitedly given to me while pregnant or dealing with a newborn. There are 274 because that is the number of days I was pregnant with my son. 39 weeks in 1 day. It was shorter with my daughter, so aim high. Some of these pieces of advice are good advice, like eat more protein, maybe call your doctor. You know, it's gonna be okay. Some of them were like maybe okay, maybe not okay. Some of them are not good advice, or weren't good advice for me. Some of them are a little nonsensical. My favorite, I'm not gonna be able to find it right now, is eat 10 almonds at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. and your milk supply will increase. Are you kidding me? Okay, thanks. Someone told me that on the phone. I was just like, okay. But it was well-meaning advice, and it was always like given to me as this like, here's the magic pill that's gonna make everything better. People didn't realize that in that giving of advice, it was actually like one more like brick on the mountain of bricks on my emotional wagon that I'm trying to pull, right? So it was just one more thing to weigh me down emotionally and impact my mental health. And there are things about mental health and postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety in here. One of them, I had confided in someone about feeling like I had postpartum anxiety, and they went, that's not real, that's just being a parent.
That's what somebody said to me.
That's helpful, yeah. Yeah, people tell you terrible things when a baby's involved, but they also tell you really good things. It's not necessarily bad, it's not necessarily good, it just is. And so that's part of this kind of representing things like this, is wanting to emphasize the neutrality of it. It's not about pumped milk versus nursed milk versus artificially created milk. It's not the good advice versus the bad advice, it's just the advice. Does that make sense? It's always well-intended. So on the pedestal behind Colton here, there's a little sheet. It has an artist statement on it, but on the other side it has all the titles of all the works. And it tells you what materials were used for each work. So on this one it says, you know, prescription bottles, acrylic gel medium, paper, graphite, and unsolicited advice. Because that's part of that artwork, right? It became a material in that artwork. Make sense? So I started this artwork just before I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, and had about 66 bottles at its first installation, which was at a show a little over a year ago over at Mark Arts, and then it kind of grew. And because this whole show was about numbers, I knew the number of bottles had to be specific. And it couldn't just be an infinite number of bottles or a random number of bottles, it had to be specific. And so I got out my little calculator and I did my math, and I like figured out, okay, 274 days. That's how long my son lived inside of me. It's crazy. It's almost a whole year. It's a long time. Questions?
Is there any intent in the size of a bottle and the message, or how you have them arrayed?
So my dad, who couldn't be here today, has always helped me install my art shows. From my thesis show in my undergrad to my graduate thesis show to multiple other shows. So he came and helped me install earlier this week. So if you were in this building and saw two bald guys rattling around, that was my dad and his bestie. He asked the same question. So the correlation between the size of the bottle and the message is a very, very significant, meaningful thing, in that it was all about how many words I could fit on that circle. Yeah.
Not quality of the message.
So this one is do hip circles, and this one is the only reason to ever induce labor is a doctor's convenience. Both of my babies were induced because I had severe hypertension. But people tell you random things that are terrible because they feel entitled to, because it was a different way for them and they're trying to share out of their own experience. This is probably the work that might be hardest for you to find yourself in, but I hope this work has kind of become a way of like looking at these difficult moments, these times when I was given terrible advice and it was hard for me, or it made me feel like a failure, or it emphasized, worsened my mental health in that moment, right? And it gave me a lens of humor to kind of look at it through. My dad was in the military. My whole family has a very weird, dark sense of humor, and we deal with everything with humor, right? Something terrible happens, we're making a joke about it within 6 hours, or like it's real, real bad. And so that was part of that redemption, that regeneration within my own artwork that was important with this work.
So did you just
Make sense?
remember all these comments and you keep a journal of what people were saying to you?
I kept a Google Doc.
This is kind of a journal.
And I would just like put them in there. And then I would bold them when I used them. And I would sort them alphabetically so I could make sure I didn't repeat them. There are a couple that still got repeated, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, that was the tracking process there. And towards the end, I was like, I can't remember anything else that people said to me, and I need like 6 more quotes. So I reached out to a couple of people and was like, what's the stupidest thing someone told you when you were pregnant? So, yeah. Questions? Other questions?
I don't know. You think that's not relatable, but I think it's relatable.
I feel like it's very relatable to women who have had babies, who have heard these things.
Everybody's got that thing.
That's true.
I mean, the number of things I've heard people say to my mother-in-law because she's diabetic about how she did it to herself, or because this, or because that, or you just eat this, you won't be diabetic. Like, it can go for being undeclared major. I mean, how many, if you're undeclared major, how many people have something to say about that? Or,
Me, you should be an art major.
Yeah.
Art is the perfect minor to any major.
Everybody's got a thing that everybody thinks they know everything about or has to comment on, and you don't necessarily. Sometimes the best thing to do is just to ask more questions.
Oh,
I think I cut you off.
no, that's great. I started reading some of these. Give her water before you nurse so she doesn't get dehydrated. Someone told me that about my newborn. Yeah, you don't give babies water before 6 months. It's like bad for their kidneys or something. Science, whatever. Amy. Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely some things in here that were good advice. And that was kind of like part of that like healing. When this piece went from like me venting about to myself through my creative practice about all the bad advice I got to like going, oh, I can redeem this, right? I can like look at it through this lens of humor and put a spin on it, was when I started writing down the good advice. Like, maybe you should call your doctor. That one's not in here. I don't know how it didn't make it. If I had only been pregnant for 39 weeks and 2 days. Tug of war pushing, that was a big one for me. Labor down, mom brain is real, it's okay. I'm looking for other good ones. The second time will be different. Are you getting enough support? I'm not finding it in here. I don't know why I'm looking for it because I know what it says. Sleep begets sleep was a piece of advice that I got from multiple sources. Like, babies need to sleep well in order to sleep well. They miss the nap, they're gonna sleep like crap all night long. I don't know why it works that way, but it does. For me, I found that my babies also needed to eat well. If Palmer didn't take a bottle well, then he was gonna be out of sorts and pissy and not eat well again, and then be hungry and angry, and it was gonna just be a nightmare for like 6 to 24 hours. So this idea of sleep begets sleep, eat begets eat. But my babies also needed to eat well to sleep well, and they needed to sleep well to eat well. If he was overtired, he wouldn't nurse. If she was overhungry, she'd kind of fall asleep, right? And that's what the title of the installation piece is it's called Begets. This idea that sleeping begets sleeping and eating begets eating, but sleeping and eating also beget each other. One filters through the other, and they both filter through themselves. So yes, there is good advice. Other questions?
Can we talk about the prints?
Yeah, we can talk about the prints. How are we we're doing great on time. Are you guys having fun? Is this helpful? Okay, I just feel like I'm talking about myself and it feels weird. Okay. I know. Is this how all the artists feel on Art for Lunch? So this piece, again, numbers are important, so there are 12. It's titled Endless Cycles. All of these, so they're jelly prints, which is this kind of like rubberized, like gelatinous, plasticky thing. And you can like roll ink or onto it or paint onto it. I used acrylic paint. And then I laid the actual clothing items onto that plate and then lifted them up and then layered more colors on and layered more paint on. And then I printed it onto paper, and sometimes I needed to do an extra print and multiple layers onto the plate and then back onto the paper. So it's this very kind of like repetitive process. It's gone. I had an idea and it's gone. This piece is titled Endless Cycles. All of the clothes are actual clothes that at least one of my babies wore. My son did not wear the bow. And like I know like the sleeper, it was like a flowery one, so my son didn't wear that one either. This one had like a giant spit up stain on it, so my daughter never wore that one. But clothes that both of my kids wore, or one of my kids wore, and some of them both of my kids. And there's this endless cycle with clothes as a mom, right? It's the endless cycle of they spit up on that, they pooped up their back, they peed when I was changing them, like multiple changes of clothes a day, cycle number 1. Multiple loads of laundry in a week, cycle number 2, the cycles of the washing machine, right? But also this like cycle of changing out the clothes all the time, like, the newborn clothes don't fit anymore, like donate those. Or do I put them in a Rubbermaid box and put them in the basement to bring them back up if we have another baby, right? So there are these layers and layers of cycles. All of these clothes are newborn or 0 to 3 month size. My son was 9 pounds, 15 ounces. He did not wear newborn clothes. My daughter was 7 pounds, 7 ounces. She did wear newborn clothes. So yeah, this kind of cycle of the growth, the changing, the laundry, everything in motherhood is very repetitious. The cycles of bad advice, the cycles of making bottles, the cycles of breastfeeding, right? Makes sense? So the clothing was a very natural way to talk about this repetition and this cycle. 12 was important because 12 months in a year, right? The data that I collected, and the crying over milk references 6 months, and the data I collected on my son was 6 months long. For 6 months, I collected all this information on him. My daughter, I only did it for 3 months. I had a toddler. I didn't have time to like write everything down. It also came a lot more naturally. I gave myself a lot more grace. I was prepared for my own mental health struggle. I was already in therapy and on medications for that, so it helped. Other questions? Yeah.
What's the top?
This one? It's a hat. So, yeah, and this is like little leggings with like the little ruffly booty thing that we do on little girls. Yeah, the little ruffle butt. I think it's actually listed as ruffle butt on the image list. So, it's the official term. Okay, we doing good? Yes, sir. These two?
Tell me about the pieces over next to the video.
So these two, I'm gonna make sure I get my numbers correct. Sorry. Okay, so all 3 of these are part of the Liquid Gold series. They're all titled Liquid Gold. So Liquid Gold Triple. This one is Liquid Gold 17,564. That's how many tick marks are on this sheet of paper. It is 1 tick mark for every minute that I nursed or pumped for my son in the first 3 months of his life. He nursed for 3 months, or for a total of 9 months. So this is only a portion of all of the nursing that we did. But it's just that, like, looking at the time, right? Thinking about what's something that you do a lot, right? How much time do we spend holding our babies, snuggling them, nursing them, feeding them? How much time do we spend pumping for them? How much time do we spend driving in our cars? How much time do we spend running to train for your sport, right? How much time do you spend in your sketchbook?
Not very much.
How much time do you spend fundraising, right? How much time do you spend with your adult children? These ideas of, like, we all spend tons of time doing something, right? We all have 24 hours in a day. But how do we spend it? And we can all relate to spending 17,564 minutes on something. You just have to figure out what it is. I liked these little tick marks because they reminded me of, like, old movies like Shawshank Redemption, where they're, like, scratching the days into the wall. And in those early days of, like, being a mom of a newborn for the first time, it felt a little like prison, or as much as I can imagine prison felt like. I was trapped at home. I was trapped with this baby or this pump, like, physically attached to my body all the time. It felt very confining. I felt trapped. And so using that kind of reference was important. Fun fact about this piece is I did it exclusively after my daughter was born. And while I was pregnant with Adela, I developed pregnancy-induced carpal tunnel. Did you know that was a thing? I did not. I, like, went to my doctor and I was like, I don't know what's wrong, but my arms are numb all the time. And she was like, oh yeah, it's carpal tunnel. It's no big deal. It might go away after you have your baby. It didn't. This was torture. So it feels appropriate. So you can kind of see, like, where the lines get, like, a little fatter or bigger or, like, wonkier. That's where my hand was, like, seizing up. I could only do a maximum of 3 lines at a time. In contrast to that, I'm coming over close to you, James, is this piece, which is liquid gold 10,949, which is every minute that I pumped or nursed my daughter in her first 3 months. And I had a much different experience with her because I was already over it. Like, all right, I already formula fed one kid and he, you know, eats dirt all the time. He does. He's almost 3. He eats dirt and goes, tasty. So weird. He's so weird. Gets it from his dad. So with her, I kind of let go of some of that a little bit. My ideals about motherhood were more realistic and less perfectionist. The amount of grace I was prepared to give myself was more. And so my journey with breastfeeding with her, even though still a struggle, still not my favorite thing, still not the way I wanted it to go, was a much easier journey. I was able to go with the flow a little bit more. And there were more moments of, like, density or tension, and then moments of, like, kind of ethereal ease. Yeah? Other questions?
Are you in a better state mental health-wise now after having months of
therapy? Yeah. Yeah, go to therapy. It's free for Newman students. I mean, yeah, I'm in a better place. I do go to therapy. I am on medication. I still deal with a lot of anxiety. But I'm also a millennial, so I think that's kind of normal. I think anyone who, I don't know, if you live through 9/11 and a pandemic and you don't deal with some sort of anxiety, like, what's wrong with you? Right? Right? But I think we can say that of any generation, right? We've all dealt with some sort of generational trauma that's outside of our control. And, you know, how we process that and Some of us are better equipped and better prepared to process it than others. I was super fortunate in that I have parents local who were really ready to jump in and support. The number of times I called my mom crying and she was just like, I'm on my way. My mom lives way west, I live east, and she would be at my house in like 10 minutes with like a bag full of Chick-fil-A. And she was never like, can I hold the baby? She was just like there to be a support and to make sure I was taking care of myself by eating food, which I wasn't doing. I'm fortunate in that I have health insurance to where therapy and medication was affordable and accessible. I am fortunate in that I have an amazing doctor who is young and has really invested in learning about maternal mental health to help her patients. And she was like, hey, I see you have this mental history. How's your mental health doing? From my first appointment with her, all the way through my pregnancy and even now. She's a friend now. She's coming to the show tomorrow night. So if you need a doctor, I have a great one. I'll introduce you tomorrow. Yeah, thanks for asking. Some days better than others, but you know. Other questions? We haven't talked about this one. This work, full disclosure, I made this work because I was afraid I wouldn't have enough work to fill the gallery. So it's, the title of these 4 pieces is ... is best. And it plays off of the phrase, fed is best or breast is best. Like, who freaking knows what's best? It's gonna change mom to mom and baby to baby. What was good for Hazel may not be good for Bash. What was good for Palmer was mostly good for Adela, but not always. And so taking the idea of breastfeeding and like detaching it and making it about combo feeding, cluster feeding, comfort feeding, demand feeding, like it doesn't matter. It's about the quantity and quality of a relationship and time for me as a mom. Yeah. And I was afraid that the wall would be empty. And they were easy. They were kind of fun and easy to like just kind of kick out.
How did you do the cluster?
Conveniently, I have a husband who's a graphic designer, so he's studied typography. So I was able to be like, I'm kind of thinking about this, and he'd be like, well, what about this? And I'd be like, ooh, what about this? So for my design majors, we're using the Gestalt principle of proximity and closure. And so I used a light box. I printed off cluster in the font I wanted. Used a light box to trace it onto my paper. And then I just did dots of the liquid gold leaf with a paintbrush around the exterior of the letters. And then the shape of the letter emerged. And then when it was dry, I erased out my pencil lines.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Same with demand. I traced it out 5 times and then painted it in and then went back in and erased those letters out, or the pencil lines out. Yeah. If you look closely, there are pencil marks. You can take off some craftsmanship credit if you want. Other questions? Yeah, Liana.
Having been in the studio with you for the past 3-ish, almost 3 years, I remember watching you like, okay, Palmer's already born. And then you're pregnant with Adela. And I remember watching you go through the process of some of these and finding ones in the trash or seeing you make marks and watching you collect bottles. Even as you're explaining the pieces you talk about, like it's data from Palmer, but you didn't start it until after Adela was born. And I see even in the way that it's presented in the work you make the pieces, this cyclical idea that our life is made up of moments that we reflect back on.
Yeah.
I just like how it works as a whole body of work.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's, yeah, I mean, and if it's not like dealing with newborns, it's dealing with toddlers, you know, as a mom, I swear I deal with more laundry now than I did when they were newborns. Some of the cycles are the same. Some of them are the same, but slightly different. And, you know, you guys have cycles in your life, the cycles of the week, of courses, of like from the start of the semester to midterm, from midterm to finals, from, the second semester, the third, repeating semesters, repeating years, hopefully not repeating classes. These ideas of repetition apply to all of us. And first baby, second baby, no babies, 3 babies, grown babies. We can relate to that. Does that make sense? Do you guys find a place for yourself within this work? Can you relate to something? Even if you're not a mom? You've never breastfed someone? Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
This gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
How many tubs is that, and how much
Same.
does that cost you? Because formula feeding is not, it's pricey.
It's so
And I think
expensive.
For me, like breastfeeding versus formula was also like, I wanted to breastfeed and save money.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to be self-sustaining, and this is not self-sustaining.
Yeah.
So this all, like seeing all that on the floor just gives me like palpitations.
Does it look like formula?
It does. Is it not?
So a canister that size of formula, and that is, we used Members Mark. Like if you're gonna be a parent, get a Sam's membership and get a Disney Plus membership. Those are the things that have sustained me through parenthood. What? No, because that's my own advice. That's learned advice. Nobody told me that. Yeah, Sam's diapers are great. Costco diapers also great. My kids did better on Sam's formula, Members Mark formula. Their canisters was also a little bit bigger and a little bit cheaper. So yeah, this is Sam's formula. And it costs somewhere between $37 and $45 a canister. And we would go, starting out, you do about a canister a month. You're only supposed to have it open for a month. 5 weeks is fine. But like now, my daughter's almost 1. We're on our last canister formula. I never have to buy formula again. Like I have so much more flexibility in my budget all of a sudden. But we were going through about 2 in a month. So about $70 in formula plus diapers.
And we had to find it during the pandemic.
Yeah, we also, with Palmer, there was a formula shortage. So again, shout out to my mom, because she was like, I have relatives in like Oklahoma City and like South Central Texas and Georgia, and they were all checking their Sam's. My mom would check every Sam's in town, like on the Sam's app, and like go buy 7 canisters of formula at a time. Yeah. If you don't have a supportive family and you choose to have babies, like power to you, please let me know how I can help, because I can't imagine not having a supportive family. But yes, that is the equivalent of about 5 canisters of formula. It's not formula, it's just Walmart brand powdered milk, which was only about $10 a bottle, or a thing. So it's about $50 worth of powdered milk versus, somebody math that real quick. Yeah, 150? 150 to $200 worth of formula. Yeah. One more quick question. Yeah, Abby.
I would be interested to see what you just said, the dollar amount of something for an entire year of a newborn. How much dollars?
Yeah.
Like collecting data on how many dollars we have spent on a
You know,
We got a prank candidate.
are you pregnant? Oh, we can talk. Yeah, babies are expensive. Get that Sam's membership. Yeah, diapers, formula, doctor's visits. For me, with really good insurance, my OBGYN care, my prenatal care, was $190 a month on top of my regular insurance payments. And then it took us 10 months of $190 a month to pay off our hospital bills. So 20 months times 190 was just the medical stuff, plus diapers, plus formula, plus clothes, plus pacifiers, which they always lose. I swear I've bought 5,000 pacifiers for my daughter, and I currently know where 3 are. Yeah.
in terms of like data.
Yeah. Oh, it would be super interesting to find out, but also super depressing.
We can make it a game.
We can make it a game. Yeah, and then you throw in childcare on top of that. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Well,
Anyway.
you guys have time to get your 1 o'clock class.
Yes,
Thank you.
I get a lot more blessings out of that.
Really fun experience.
Really the Newman experience.